Hello and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly virtual panels. I'm Ed Niedermeyer. I am the Communications Director here at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. And thank you all for being here today for another discussion about a really important topic in AV education. Really one of the fundamental challenges, I think, that we face in the realm of AV, automated vehicle education broadly. And that is, of course, the distinction between autonomous driving and driver assistance, and frankly, the quite rampant public confusion around that distinction. We've got, once again, just the perfect, really, group of folks to provide a variety of perspectives on this. I'm really glad to have them all here today. First of all, I have to welcome back PAVE's very own chairman, also Audi's Director of Government Affairs, Brad Sturtz. Brad, welcome back. Always great to see you here.
Thanks, Ed.
We also have Hillary Kane. Hillary is the Vice President, of Technology, Innovation, and Mobility Policy for the Alliance for Auto Innovation. Hillary, welcome. We're also joined by Steve Nima. He is the Chief Technology Officer at LHP Engineering Solutions. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So this is a topic that we talk a lot about at PAVE, right? This sort of public confusion about what is driver assistance and what is autonomy. And it seems like a lot of this confusion centers very specifically on what are called level 2 driver assistance systems. And oftentimes, for us who talk about these topics all day long, we can say level 2 and we know exactly what we're all talking about, but that's simply not the case for everyone. And so Hillary, I wanted to start with you and just sort of help us, get started here by making sure everyone does know what we mean when we're talking about level 2 driver assistance. What is it, and what is the sort of core attributes that are most important for people to understand about what a level 2 driver assistance system is?
So basically a level 2 system, first and foremost, it's a driver assist feature. So it's not an autonomous system. It's not a self-driving system. It's not a driverless system. It's essentially a feature that does some steering and some acceleration and braking for the driver on a sustained basis. Okay, what in the world does that mean, right? That means it can keep you in the lane and keep you driving forward without crashing into the car in front of you. It's basically what it can do.
So very concisely and relatably put, and I think that you sort of the way you describe that, though, it kind of helps cast a little bit of light also on why some of this confusion may be happening, right? In that, maybe if people think that, the steering is happening automatically, the acceleration, the braking, that there's some level of automation there, that that's everything maybe that constitutes driving. But in fact, Brad, and I'd love you to speak to this, there is more to the driving task than these things that Hillary sort of mentioned, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for the lower levels of ADAS leading into autonomy, there still is a responsibility for the human to be prepared to take over the operation of the vehicle at any time. So one of Hillary's colleagues put it very appropriately, and I'll quote his comment, which is to say, you're either on duty or you're off duty. And off duty is where you're more of a passenger, really not going to be called upon to operate the vehicle. And that's a very clear and important distinction for people to understand. And unfortunately, I think it's a little clouded in the current environment.
Yeah, yes. And I mean, if I could jump in, I mean, the way I was, leading into this conversation, I was thinking a little bit about this and about this question. And when you're driving a car, you're obviously, I hope we're all doing more than just staying in our lane and not crashing into the car in front of us, right? You're monitoring the driving environment, the roadway constantly for all that stuff that always happens that you aren't expecting, right? The pedestrian that pops out between two cars, the debris that's in the roadway that fell off the pickup truck a couple of minutes ago, the ambulance that's gonna blow through the red light at the intersection you're coming up to because it's on its way to an emergency. And like, that's the stuff that like the system isn't doing, a level 2 system isn't doing. And so you as a driver have to be constantly keeping your eyes on the road for that sort of stuff and be prepared to jump in and veer out of the way or slam on the brakes or whatever, not T-bone the ambulance going through the intersection, for example.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. See,
and I could add to that just a little bit. I see the big difference in the ownership of the vehicle, right? Like, are you on duty, off duty? And right now, I see it mostly you're on duty. That's what's out there right now. It's a lot of what's out there is you're on duty. And if you read the manuals, just read nobody reads the manuals, right? But if you read the manual, it says you're on duty. So it's meant to help you. It's just like everything else helps you, just like a rear view mirror helps you, just like everything else helps you. It's meant to help you. And it does help. I mean, it helps. And then it becomes a question of how does it help and does it harm and things like that. And those are the kinds of things we get into.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember when I was learning how to drive and I thought, well, I've got these basic skills down and it's great. And my dad was like, no, what you don't understand is the defense. This, right? It's that you need to be into and what do you need to be reading in the road around you and the people around you. And obviously, I think when you start to think about the automation of driving, that's the harder part. Right. But I think relevant to what we're discussing here, like it's also the part that we do oftentimes subconsciously. And so it can be hard to, if those most active parts are being automated, then those parts that we may be doing subconsciously may not necessarily be obvious to everybody. But Steve, I want to stick with you for a sec here because you mentioned this on-duty, off-duty thing. And I think obviously that's the core of kind of how you make this issue simple for the user, right? Because but you do in functionality, and I think there's a really interesting perspective to be shared about this here, about sort of what that human is doing, what is being relied on as part of a level 2 system. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So functional safety is kind of a process that defines the method to go from hazard to safety mechanism, right? So how do we make this safe, and how do we define all the hazards, right? And the more you go from L2 to L5, which is, off duty, the more complicated that gets. In today's world where it's a matter of sensors and like some braking and so on, it's not quite as complicated as it could. If you were to take the driver off duty, it's extremely complicated because now, actually between taking them off duty and on duty, actually go into a spectrum of somewhat on duty, right? Like we described, it will brake for you. Okay, great. So maybe I don't have to brake. No, you still have to your foot, so that part of it goes into human behavior analysis. Now you're going into a realm that's so complex and we don't understand the brain as well as we think we do. We say we have a sixth sense. So people sometimes ask me, or my daughter will ask me as I'm driving, how did you know he was going to pull out in front of you? Well, the answer is I've memorized some patterns and I use that memorization of patterns to actually develop a safety mechanism for myself. So functional safety defines a process to go through to define all those things. But when you reach a fully autonomous vehicle, you take the driver out of it. So, then it becomes the technology, the electronics, the software that has to take over for the driver. And as I described earlier, that human behavior aspect of things is so complex. If it was all autonomous, it's a lot easier than a combination of no autonomous and autonomous. So there's a whole mix of things going on from that, and then we focus on helping clients navigate that.
And just to dig a little bit deeper into this, because so for example, if you have like a relatively simple system, which I think a lot of if you compare the technology in a level 2 system with a fully autonomous level 4 vehicle that operates in a comparable domain, you'll see there's some big technical differences. And I want to touch on specifically if a one camera system versus a camera, LiDAR, radar system, for example, if that one camera misses something, it's really human to be there. They're the backup in that quote failure mode, right? And in to make up for that human not being there in a fully autonomous system, you need like a really vastly different level of capability. If you could just share a little, and that sort of functional safety, how that difference plays
so you're
out.
pointing to the safety mechanism, right? So the camera goes away, and then the safety mechanism, the driver takes over. And that's like from the dawn of time of vehicles, the biggest safety mechanism, right? And by the way, over time though, there have been other things that have been put in place that the manufacturers take responsibility for, like safety belts and plenty of them, anti-lock brakes and so on. Now, if you're talking about the machine taking over completely, then when the camera fails, the easiest thing to think of, well, there's another camera, all right? And but is that camera quick enough? Is that camera responsive enough? Is the link between the camera and the brakes good enough? And then you get into all that kind of analysis of like a redundant system, and that's why there's a radar and a LiDAR and so on. And all that combination has to respond like a human or better than a human. So now you can argue the comments out there about like, well, it's better than humans anyway. But those not being necessarily, I don't say that would be the best way to approach it. It's just better than what we have. Because I don't think people who get into an accident doing an autonomous feature are really going to care that it was probably better than their teenager driving, So I think it gets into the redundancy. It gets into how you define your systems, the systems engineering behind redundant systems and safety systems, and then all the analysis that goes into those sensors and the quality of those sensors and part of functional safety.
Yeah. Hillary, I wanted to sort of ask you, now we've sort of gotten a sense here of sort of this relationship between the role of the human and sort of the robustness really of the technology. We sort of understand that in a level 2 system, this human is really almost not just a part of the system, but a really, really important part of that system in a lot of ways. From that point, how do you then help people understand like, why the perception that human's perception of the system they're engaged with is so important? Because this is not like a traditional auto safety issue per se, right? It's sort of a newer one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think that, the problem is that if there's confusion, right? If I get into the vehicle and I'm at all confused, and I think there's some level of confusion and there's some level of just outright ignoring reality in some cases. But if you're in the vehicle and you're not performing the role that you are supposed to be performing to make that system work, right? Like you're not monitoring the driving environment, you're not monitoring the way. Nothing is monitoring the roadway. And that means that pedestrian that pops out between the two cars, or the debris is going to get hit by you. And it means, that the debris that's in the roadway is not, you're not going to veer out of the way. You're going to crash into it. And that has real safety implications for you, for the people in the cars around you. Like this isn't a joke. This isn't, this isn't something that's sort of theoretical, right? Like this is really significant potential safety impacts and crashes and injuries and fatalities if you're not fulfilling that role that you're supposed to.
And I could add an example to that, right? I had interns this summer testing an adaptive cruise control system. And that's supposed to keep you at a certain distance from the vehicle in front of you. So they turned it on and they started recording. But what they didn't realize is you can turn on the regular cruise control without the adaptive part, which doesn't keep you that far away. So it's a misuse of that feature. And then they had to quickly react. Why are we approaching the car in front of us? Why are we, they kept thinking, and then they had to slam the brakes, right? So they misused the device. So that's the part of the human behavior that's really complex and difficult to analyze.
Yeah. And to bring up sort of the next step in this, I feel like a lot of times, when whether it's PAVE itself or other, members of the media or whoever sort of corrects other people's misuse of the language around these different kinds of systems. A lot of the common reaction we get sometimes is sort of like, this is just this like academic debate, right? Or even, maybe like, my words here don't really even matter. Can you speak a little bit to sort of what we know about sort of how the words that are used about these technologies can really have like an actual safety effect in the real world?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what we're saying, which is to really defining and making very clear to the human operator what their responsibilities are. And if we use words that sort of fuzz up the idea of a vehicle being highly or fully automated, words like autonomous, that sends a wrong signal, I think. And words do matter because people have, over the last decade or decade and a half, really assigned a lot of and expectations for what the technology could deliver, and frankly, expectations business side to bring this technology to the market sooner than we've actually seen. So people are in a hurry to see it, and yet we are clear about what their responsibilities are. And number one reason for that is because there has to be trust in how the vehicle is going to perform when you're not there to operate it yourself, or when you're handing over more of the responsibility of the operation. There has to be trust not only for you in the inside of the car, but for government that's regulating traffic, and also for the other around you in traffic or as bystanders, to really understand what this means. So if you're prematurely handing over or surrendering responsibility when the vehicle and the system isn't technically capable of doing that, that could cause, as I think Hillary mentioned, really serious complications and problems.
Yeah. And I do feel like the systems out there are designed for engineers. So it's almost a driver's ed situation at this point, right? Adaptive cruise control has to be set, and then it has to be set with a certain distance, and you've got 3 options. And I mean, that's a lot. That's an entire feature that a new driver has to learn, right? Then that's a level 2 system. It's not really, we're not getting to the more complex stuff.
Yeah, and I think you bring up an interesting point, and there was reference to sort of user manuals and owner manuals, and the fact that not everyone actually really reads them. I mean, a lot of what we're discussing here is sort of the question of, what are this system's actual capabilities, and making sure that you are operating them in a way that is consistent with those is part of this. Is there just more, like, is this about like the relationship between the consumer and the automaker has to evolve here, where as a consumer you can't just kind of take what you hear or even see sometimes, right? Because people will do stunts and things that make things look one way that may, for you in a different situation, be quite dangerous and something you don't actually want to do. Is there more responsibility? Obviously, automakers, the industry is out trying to educate more, but do we have to just kind of, is part of this just being better at understanding really what's actually going on with the systems that we use? Hillary?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important question. First of all, everyone should read their owner manuals. Please read your owner's manual. There's lots of really important information in there. Okay, I've said that. I know people are not going to read their owner's manuals, but I feel an obligation to plead that people actually do. No, but I think you're right. I think, as we're an association that represents the auto industry here in the United States, and we've been giving a lot of thought as an association, as an industry, of what more we could be doing, right, as an industry, as an association, to help address some of this confusion. And one of the things that we did just in April of last year, the association came out with a set of driver monitoring principles. And I want to talk about this for a second, because this is really an important role that automakers and developers can be playing in the space, is to put technology on their vehicles called driver monitoring technology. I hate that name because it sounds like we're monitoring the driver when we're actually ensuring that the driver is monitoring the roadway, which is a little bit different, but driver monitoring technology, which helps ensure that the human driver in a level 2 system is keeping their eyes on the road, right? Is keeping focused on the driving environment for all of those things that we were talking about that may happen that you're not expecting. We think that should be a standard feature on every level 2 vehicle, that there should be an effective, robust driver monitoring system on every single level 2 vehicle that can help make sure that the driver is engaged. And that is something that automakers can be doing. Another thing that's in that principles, I'll just mention quickly, and you hinted at it, is a responsibility to name these things consistent with the capability that its capability sure that the information that you're providing, whether it's in the owner's manual, whether it's in promotional materials, also actually accurately reflects the technical capabilities and limitations of those systems as well. So those are the sorts of things that I think at least our member companies at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation think is important and are things that we think we should be doing to help address some of these issues.
And Steve, I was wondering if you have any some perspective on that driver monitoring piece as well, and sort of how fundamental that can be to, again, just being able to go through the safety case for any of these systems and say, yes, we have confidence that critical piece of this system, which is also a human, is going to stay a part of that system, is going to stay engaged with that system.
So there's actually an industry parallel, right? So in the rail industry, the conductors actually have a button they have to press, so they make sure that they're awake, right? And I forget the name of that device. And then it became more complex, right? So because the conductor, they could actually press the button while they're half asleep, and then they force them to put in a code, and now they're actually forcing them to actually put videos and watch the conductors, right? So there's industry parallels for these things, and the monitoring is pretty key, actually, particularly as you're navigating from L2 to L5. So I'm looking forward to the time when I just go in and I say, take me to Costco, and it just goes, right? But between now and then, it's going to be a combination of those things, so and it'll evolve, I think, as it features over time. And then the driver monitoring, we'll learn a lot from that. I think that's where it might actually be far more complex than the actual technology that does the human analysis and the monitoring of the behaviors. Might be far more complex than just the ECUs and the analysis, and even some of the AI, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly understanding people simply by a video feed is a tough challenge, right? I think, as we all have learned over the last couple of years, right, from time to time. But Brad, I want to go back to something that you touched on earlier, because I think it's not just one of the more important pieces of this whole conversation, but it's also one of the hardest ones, I think, sometimes to help people understand. It's a challenge to help people understand that there's this direct link between the words you use and potential real world, like life and death impacts in this very dangerous thing we do every day. Beyond that, though, I think it's even harder sometimes to help people understand that that's not even the only thing at stake. That, as you mentioned, like that the fully autonomous technology really does depend on public trust, and that sort of the many benefits that we all hope for from this technology really depends on people trusting it, and that telling them you can trust something that you can't trust, and then bad things happening, but then other things as well, potentially around how those instances are reported and things like that, that these have a real impact on this really critical issue of public trust. I was hoping you're very eloquent on this topic, so I was hoping you could just speak to that a bit here, because it is a challenging thing to get across sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think it's borne out in a lot of surveys that have been done by PAVE and others, that if you look at the American population, and it's also pretty true in other parts of the world, there's still an extreme reluctance to fully embrace high automation, because people just don't know what it's like, right? And so you're not necessarily going to enter into an agreement to take a ride in something that you don't really understand how it works. And what we do see, though, is that when people get a chance to experience this and build some familiarity and trust, they begin to warm up to the idea and begin to accept it more commonly. And so this is the key thing. We've all been in such a rush to define this magic moment of taking our hands off the steering wheel as the future of mobility, when maybe we should step back and take a more gradual approach to sort of come back to where most people, most ordinary everyday drivers really think and feel about this topic, and say, let us expose you to more to how the technology can begin to assume more responsibility, and define it more in terms of supporting what you're doing, giving you a lot more cognitive relief in the sort of arduous task that driving has become, and then gradually, letting you experience it, trust it, and begin to open up to higher levels of autonomy, all the way to the point where the vehicle is doing more of the driving. And also, I think that's why you see too, people don't really understand the driving environments that a lot of the high automation systems are going to be operating in. There's sort of this perception that there'll be driverless vehicles whizzing all over interstates and circling endlessly around Manhattan. And really, if you look at how the technology is evolving, it's being done in very safe and predictable environments where the conditions are pretty well known. So we just have to build a better awareness of how the technology is truly evolving and how it can be used so that people can begin to understand it and trust it.
I mean, if I could jump in, I mean, one of the things that I think, you know, for those of us who work in this space and have been working in this space for many years, I think there, you know, to be frank, there's a growing frustration, right? With, you know, you see headlines in the newspaper that talk about, you know, all of these fatalities that have happened at the hands of, you know, autonomous vehicles, or you hear policymakers make these sorts of statements. And the problem is that they are conflating autonomous vehicles with vehicles that are not autonomous, with these level 2 vehicles that we're talking about. And the problem is it creates this perception in the public and policy circles that autonomous vehicle technology is not safe because people are misusing or abusing non-autonomous technology. It's like, it's this reasoning that I mean, it's like, you can't have a, you know, we shouldn't allow people to have dogs because cats scratch people. We're literally talking about, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not even, it's apples to oranges. I'm mixing my metaphors now. Cats to dogs, apples to oranges, right? Like, they're not the same thing. And so you can't hold, you know, the dog responsible for what the cat did, and you can't help, you know, hold, you know, the apple responsible for the, anyway, I can't even go there, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it's just creating a perception, right? That there is, that autonomous vehicles are not safe, and that we are not in a position to say that on.
But yeah, if I could jump in to a point Steve made, a lot of the ways that this has been discussed is in terms that are important for engineers, but difficult for the average driver to understand. And to what you were saying, Hillary, I think that's a very clear distinction that we need to start to deliver so that it becomes a little bit more comprehensible to people to really get what kind of vehicle they're in.
And I can add to that also, like, so you've got to simplify the message, right? So what is, when a consumer goes to purchase a vehicle, I can imagine a time when he sees a safety rating pertaining to autonomous, which defines its rigor, the rigor with which it was developed, right? And there are plenty of, you know, industry parallel to that, although they tend to be, you know, business to government, not just the consumer, although we have the same, you know, 5-star crash rating, those kinds of things already there. But there can also be a world where you just get an easy number that tells you this meets multiple countries' state-of-the-art safety standards, you know, or something of that nature, you know, that could simplify it for the consumer. And I don't know how, I'm only kind of crystal balling it in my head of hands.
Comment, Ed, sorry, real quick. I know we're running short on time, but to one of the comments in the chat, this also has to involve government and the stakeholders that are setting the regulations and the policy and the expectations from that side too.
Yeah. So unfortunately, another 30 minutes has just whizzed by here, as it seems to always do. I just want to take a couple more minutes and ask each of you to just very briefly, we've just sort of described, you know, the scope and scale and depth of sort of the education challenge here. Obviously, those of us at PAVE are doing everything that we can, but we really kind of need everyone to kind of be able to pitch in order to do this at a sort of at scale, like distributed way to really have an impact, I think. So just as briefly as you can, if people are listening who get it, that this is serious, this is important, and want to make some kind of a difference themselves, what is the piece of advice or the thing that you would tell them to sort of most keep in mind as you're doing this? And we'll start with Steve, and go ahead, Steve.
I'm going to steal Hillary's comment. Read the driver's manual and decide for yourself if you understand the features that are in there and whether you really want them right now as they stand. You know, so I think that's a big part. Educate yourself on what these things actually are, and then play out with your car in your driveway and figure it out, because there's a lot of features there that you're not aware of.
Great. And Hillary?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting to your point, Ed, I think we all have an obligation to call out when we see people intentionally or unintentionally conflating these technologies, right? Like I'm that annoying person, you know, who gets on my neighbors and gets on the other parents at my kids' sporting events, and even like the random people at the grocery store who like get it wrong, right? And start talking about level 2 systems as self-driving. I think we have to, every chance we get, correct that misperception.
Absolutely. I recently had my partner came down and was like, you have to read, she knows now that when she sees that, she's like, you're going to freak out about this. Brad, our chairman, the last word, of course, goes to you.
Well, I think it's important to deliver the message of what the technology that you're experiencing today, where it's heading in the future, and meet people at different levels of their ability to when they want to absorb that information. We can't just leave it up to the person selling the car on the showroom floor or somebody in the service bay, or even expect a pamphlet, or as we talked about, service or owner's manuals. There's going to have to be different ways for people to understand that we're really walking towards a very different dynamic in the relationship between we as a driver, or then a passenger, and the vehicle, and the ways that traffic is going to operate in the future.
Absolutely. Great note to end on. Of course, much more to discuss here. And of course, we will continue to try and discuss this topic from as many angles as possible. For now, though, thank you so much to all of our guests for being here. Steve Nema is the Chief Technology at LHP Engineering Solutions. Steve, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Hillary Kane is the Vice President of Technology, Innovation, and Mobility Policy for the Alliance for Auto Innovation. Hillary, thanks as always for being here.
Thank you.
And Brad Sturtz is the Director of Government Affairs at Audi and PAVE's very own chairman. Brad, thanks so much for being here again today.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for a good conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Great.
And thanks, of course, to our audience for once again choosing to make automated vehicle education a priority in your day. We know you have many demands on your attention, and your being here and taking these issues seriously really means so much to all of us. Special thanks also to the folks in the chat who had a really some really interesting thoughts. These will, of course, go into our database. Of course, all the questions that we received when you register go into our database of questions. You can see some of the answers that we get from our members on our social media channels. You can follow us on most social media platforms at PAVE Campaign. You can also listen to this as a podcast episode on your favorite podcast platform by searching for PAVEcast. Thank you all again, and we'll see you here again next week for another of PAVE's weekly virtual panel discussions.